Hi everyone, and thanks for being with me on my live feed on a Tuesday afternoon. If you're new, things that aren't all that political as well, I did a post recently on why it is that we are so cruel. What makes us cruel? And it wasn't one of those things that was necessarily political at all. It was really about inquiring, questioning our behaviour and how we are particularly, in most cases, politically and otherwise, cruel to other people. And what it would take for us not to be so cruel. And so one of the reasons why I do what I do is to highlight issues that I think are important to me, that worry me, that I think about, and that I would like to change. So, and one of the things I guess that came out of thinking about that and doing some research was that we are innately, we're also cruel, but we also hold other qualities such as compassion, love, understanding, empathy, and a whole host of qualities that I think are valuable to us. And the problem that we have is that we fail to implement them in a way which is constructive and understanding and in ways which makes a difference. I'm tired of, and I'm 74 years old, so I'm not young. And one of the issues that has concerned me for years has been how we continue to denigrate other people, to attack people that we don't agree with in ways which are unhelpful. And I don't mean we can't attack concepts and ideas, and I'm about to do some of that today, in fact, when it comes to immigration. But there certainly comes a point whereby we need to take a step back. We need to listen to what other people have to say, take it on board, and to appreciate that other people have a perception or a perceived sense of understandings that are relevant to them. And we need to understand why those perceptions are there. Funnily enough, this is a sidebar. I've went down a rabbit hole over the last couple of days looking at institutions around the world and how they behave. And one of these institutions, one of them is the correctional services, and particularly in the United States. Now, fun fact, I don't know whether any of you knew that in the US, they incarcerate more women than any other country on this planet. And we certainly know that per head of population, they incarcerate more people generally. But I didn't know about the women. And there was this documentary where this guy was talking to these women who had committed terrible crimes. One of them was had committed many murders, two in fact, but nevertheless had killed these people for whatever reason. That wasn't gone into. But what was evident from it was that people were incarcerated for, many of the women were incarcerated for drug use. And when you hear their backstory, you've got to think, well, why hasn't someone dealt with or managed or provided an intervention which helps these women to navigate situations that they've been in, which has created the problem that it has? And one woman in particular talked about being just being angry, and she was in jail because she had beat somebody up. And she'd been involved in some robberies. But when she was talking about the anger, and her mother was also in jail, and she's got a few kids that are living with, I think, their grandparent, her father. So, but it was evident from that conversation that this woman had issues that just apparently never got addressed. It's like, and this is going on a tangent, I'm going to talk about immigration in just a moment. I'd be most interested to hear what you have to say about that. So if you have any comments about immigration to Australia, let me know. But one of the things that really fascinated me was that when we try they've tried for decades now to deal with the drug problem by trying to work out where the source of drugs are coming from. And in the US in particular, they have chosen to now bombard what they think are people transporting drugs from the Caribbean to the US, and blowing these people up, regardless of the fact that we don't know who they are. It's a war crime, what they've done, but nevertheless, that's what they're doing, because we must deal with the issues. And it was interesting that the president of Mexico once said that, okay, we're dealing with the issue on our side of the border, but maybe you should choose to deal with the issue that's on your side, which is why people take drugs in the first place. What is happening? And this woman that they were talking to in this documentary I was watching reminded me that you are not in that. I know it's a micro thing where it's just one person, but I'm sure it's not just this one person. That where we fail society the most, I believe, is in failing to understand or to provide interventions which are going to help the individual. Every one of those people. Well, that's probably not true. There are probably psychopaths and narcissists and all these other sort of people incarcerated, and probably rightfully so. But my guess would be that a majority of the people who are incarcerated could have had a better outlook on life had they had interventions or people or organisations that were prepared to intervene. And this is an area in which I believe we fail all the time. We attempt to patch up problems, but we fail to be able to not just patch them up, but to actually meet the source of the problem. And the source of the problem often is simply around poverty. And as long as we have poverty, as long as we have domestic violence, as long as we have rampant drug use, we are always likely to have the problems that we try to extinguish by bombarding those people who are, in this case, bringing drugs into our countries and failing to deal with the actual issue. And folks, I've talked about this for years because I've been involved in child protection. I started the Child Protection Party and been working to change a system. And the problem, and I think the most frustrating, I'm ranting, I do apologise for that, but one of the things that frustrates me the most is that the system fails to listen. I, for years, because of the work I'd done, had I think, innovative ideas that would have helped, didn't help the situation. And I had ideas, though, that I thought, I got distracted by a message that came through. But I had ideas that I believed were valuable, but no one ever listened to me because I wasn't a person of that much influence. I wasn't supposedly an expert in the area. And the problem that we have is that the people that know the solutions to the problems are the people that are living the problems. The people that are faced with the issues, they're the ones with the solutions. And in child protection, I was always interested in listening to the parents whose kids were removed because they knew the issues and they knew what needed to be done to improve that so that they could have had their children returned. But they were never listened to because these so-called experts, who often were judgmental, who often thought that these people should have had their kids moved because of their socio-economic situation, because they're involved in domestic violence or because there was drug use or whatever the case might be. These were the people, these experts were judging these people, whereas they should have been looking to those people for the solution to the problems, because those people had the solutions, they had the ideas. So I would be interested to know what you think, how do you resolve some of these deep-rooted problems in society? Because my understanding is that the best way to resolve some of these issues is simply to talk to the people who are living them. Lived experience counts for everything. When we're thinking about not only drug use, domestic violence, kids being raised in households where there's abuse, we can always talk to the victim of all of that to find out what those solutions are. But the underlying belief is that the victims themselves are not experts enough, yet they're experts in their own experiences. Yet we do not tend to look to those experts in order to be able to resolve the problem, because they're not experts as we often want to see experts, which is you've got a degree, you've got a PhD, you've worked in the area for 20 odd years, whatever the case might be, and someone else identifies you as an expert. Yet the experts are those people who have lived experiences. That's my rant at the beginning. So I want to thank all those people that have come on board, and anybody who's got any suggestions with regard to that, I'd be more than delighted to hear. Dee says, someone said, Donald Trump thinks that DV should not be a crime. Of course, what could we expect from the moron in chief? I'll just bring that up so that you can see that. I'll bring that up here. Whoops, wrong one. So I saw today that Donald Trump doesn't think DV should be a crime. Well, I guess that validates everything that I've just said, because they're not interested in dealing with abuse in homes. They're not interested in dealing with the impact that that abuse has on children. That is important for us to understand. So just diverting back a little bit to what I was talking about before, or what I want to talk about generally, which is I've got a range of topics today that we can talk about. I've got an issue around Robodebt. I've got something about the Dondale detainees, that Dondale Centre in Northern Territory. I've got something about Sky News, and I've got Dan Andrews. So I've got a range of things that we can talk about today. But I wanted to start with something that I think is really important, and that is immigration. Now, I've made a few posts in relation to immigration over the last few days, and I would like us to focus as best we can on this. So the question I'm going to be asking you, do you believe that the Liberal Party have, through Senator Jacinta Price, have they endeavoured to flag immigration as a political issue based on who immigrants tend to vote for? Sean, Phil, thanks for your comments, Sean. I'll get back to that in just a moment, if I may. But what's happened here is that Jacinta Price, who incidentally is the Shadow Minister for Defence, a portfolio I would suggest that Jacinta has very little information about, very little knowledge on, that she herself is not an expert in defence. That in fact, Jacinta Price fails to defend herself, let alone understanding anything about defending Australia. And I think it's really important to, Sean says, Jacinta Price thrives on negative attention. Yeah, she does. But what has happened, though, is that the Liberal Party found themselves in a bit of a quagmire, because they, at this particular point in time, are refusing to reprimand Jacinta in a way which is letting everybody know that this is not their policy and they're wrong. The facts are that immigrants who come into Australia, did a post on this as well, please look that up, I'd appreciate that, that the Liberal Party are attacking immigrants, particularly a specific group of immigrants, in this case the Indians, inappropriately. Because immigrants right across the board tend to vote Labor. And the reasons why they vote Labor is that some of them come from oppressive societies, so they see conservatism as being a part of that type of oppressive society. They see the Labor Party or the left of politics being more in favour of where they wish to go and the values and principles that are important to them. They come from working class families often, and they tend to associate with the Labor Party. And the Labor Party tend to be able to sell their policies to this particular group of people. Hence the reason why they're so popular with immigrants. Whereas, on the other hand, and this is the Liberal Party's problem, and if they understood this, perhaps they'll be able to do something about it, the Liberal Party fail to understand, for reasons I do not know, that they are unable to, firstly, they're unable to sell their policies to the immigrant community. And look, I just need to say that because a person enters this country, from the moment they enter this country, doesn't mean they have the right to vote. So we're talking about immigrants who've been here for some time, jumped through all the hurdles, ticked all the boxes, done all the things that they need to do in order to become an Australian citizen. So, but it is true that immigrants do vote for the Labor Party. But the Liberal Party have failed in order to be able to present their policies in a way which is at least attractive to the immigrant community. So when a politician, a high-profile politician such as Senator Price, stands up in front of PK on ABC News and tells everybody that Indians are the problem because they tend to vote for the Labor Party, as correct as that statement might be, talking about immigrants in general, where she got that notion from, that it's Indians in particular, I will never know, because I'm not too sure there are statistics on that. There are statistics on the immigrant community in general and who they vote for, but how she got this idea that it was Indians in particular, and why single them out? The Liberal Party have been working for some time in order to ingratiate themselves to the Indian community, and they have failed. And to make it even worse, Jacinta Price makes these statements that isolates the Indian community from the Liberal Party even further. So, how does Susan Lee respond to this? Susan decides that on Insiders, on Sunday, that she's not going to reprimand Jacinta openly or publicly. And that is wrong. She had an opportunity to be able to say, I now wish to, well, I would like to, I would have thought that she could have at least said, I've removed her of that position. We're re-evaluating where she sits in the party on the front bench because she overstepped the mark and she was wrong. Susan admitted that Jacinta was wrong, but she could not bring herself to say, well, we need to get rid of her, we'll re-evaluate that, we'll give her some other portfolio maybe, or we'll just sit her on the back bench for some time. The problem that Susan has is that, number one, she's got an Indigenous, I think she might be the only Indigenous person in the Liberal Party, and we can't get rid of her because of the optics, and that she's a woman, and they're scarce of women in the Liberal Party on the front bench. Anyway, that would not be a good look. For those two reasons, she's probably chosen not to do so. But if she wishes to present as a relatively strong, whatever that might mean, leader of the Liberal Party, then she needs to be able to make a stand, and she should have made a stand against Jacinta, but she chose not to because for whatever reason she believes that it is in the party's best interest to be able to maintain an Indigenous person and a woman on the front bench, regardless of who you say. Now, someone recently said to me, be careful what you say about Jacinta Price because she's Indigenous. And as those of you that watch my channel will certainly know, I'm in favour of all Indigenous actions that are going to bring about better outcomes for Indigenous people. I support that 1,000%. That doesn't need to be said. But if a person, male or female, says things that I think are inappropriate, that are damaging, then I will speak out against them. And as Sean just said, Jacinta thrives on negative attention. And he's right, because there's nothing that Jacinta does that necessarily is positive or what I see as constructive. And all we need to do is look at the voice referendum and see how she bastardised all of that for her own self-interest. Not because it was a good thing to do for Aboriginal people, but because she wanted to swim against the tide, because she saw that as something that would elevate her to a position of power and notoriety, which she has done. And I think that is wrong. So let me know what you think about the Jacinta Price issue and immigration in general. One of the issues I think that's really important to highlight with regard to immigration is that we need to have it. And that when people talk about it, and this really pisses me off, when people talk about it today, they talk about mass migration. Well, what do you mean by mass migration? What's this mass migration thing? I did a post on this as well. And you will see from that post that mass migration refers to people that are fleeing violence. So in Sudan, for example, where there are wars, a lot of people fled that. They'll flee areas which have got issues around droughts and floods and so forth, some sort of environmental issue. They'll flee countries such as Afghanistan because of political disruption, or Sri Lanka, or these other countries where they have to flee for their own safety, or Iran, for example, as we all know these days. So that mass migration can happen because a lot of people flee their countries because they're fearful for their lives and fearful for the lives of the people around them, their family. So this is mass migration. So when people talk about mass migration in Australia, they don't know what in the hell they're talking about. I think they're saying, or they intend to say, that it's about a lot of people. So there's a lot of people coming to Australia, whether it be 250, 300,000 people, whatever it is per year, these people are coming to Australia. And there are too many of them. That's what they're saying. Mass migration is a completely different issue, and I've tried to talk about this before, but it doesn't mean the same as what they're attempting to tell us. So when they say mass migration, they're wrong, but they could be talking about the number. So one of the things that fascinates me most is what number? What number best fits? When you're talking about, what do you want to see? Do you want to see 20,000 people come to Australia? Is that a good number? Or do you want to see 50,000 people? And then who are those people that you want to come? Are they skilled workers? Are they people coming to be with their families? Are they people coming to fill jobs around building houses? Are they tech people? Do they have to have a certain income? Do they have to buy their way into Australia like they do in America, where people can pay $5 million just to become a United States citizen? Who do you want? Tell us. I think this is a great conversation to have. The problem that we have, I haven't heard anyone, politician or otherwise, talk about the number that they think should be appropriate. I watch, unfortunately, a lot of Sky News, but I can tell you, they're not talking about the number either, and who comprises that number. When we start to have that conversation, I will listen, and people should listen, because that's a valuable conversation to have. So why is it then that we start to think that the number is wrong? And when does it turn into a racist argument? I think that it becomes racist, particularly when we start to identify groups of people, such as Indian, such as Afghanistan, such as Chinese, such as Asian. When we start to identify a specific group of people as being too many, we are then turning it into a racist issue. And that's what's happened. It has become about race. And when you have thousands of people flying Australian flags, good on you. Glad to know you've bought an Australian flag. I'm sure there's an industry out there that's doing very well out of all of that. But what does all of that mean? Why are you out there protesting in the way that you are? Because Australia is too coloured? Is that the problem? Is it because Australia is not assimilating? There's another word for us to confuse us even further. So it's not assimilating. So they're not assimilating into what? Into our culture. Well, what is our culture? This is another issue that blows me away. Why can't you define what our culture is? And And you know, and people talk about this. So people talk about this. Is what really frustrates me is people talk about these terms, this crap about something that they are able to not articulate. They are completely void of any understanding as to what it is that they actually mean by what they're saying. And I find that personally frustrating. Right, if you're able to define what the Australian culture is, let me know. Use your language. You know, it's like speaking to a 2-year-old. You know, like, use the words. Tell us what it is. But they're not. Because when they start to articulate what they think Australia is, it comes across as racist. Because we want a white Australia. Because we want this British colonial version of who we should be. We want that to be Australia, which excludes all those people that come from a different country. So I think it's powerful that people are unable to define what that culture specifically should look like in this country. Because this country, and this is the problem, this country is a multicultural country. And this is the issue that a lot of people, particularly on the right, are unable to accept. That here in Australia, we have many cultures that all come together to make up this one culture. And that one culture begins, I think, with Indigenous communities and their right to land and their right to have their views and their perceptions understood and adhered to, and also to deal with the issues that have been Indigenous issues that have been here for, 2 centuries. Those issues still aren't dealt with, aren't managed. But so that's one block over there. And then you've got, and that's an important one. And then you've got the rest of us who came from immigrants at some point along the line. We're all immigrants. We all come with different perspectives, different ideas, different understandings of the world, different perceptions. And there is this effort, I don't know how to describe it, this effort based on the fact that we're all different. That in itself becomes a divisive point. That somewhere along the line, because we are all different, we are then not adhered to, not joined together by any coherent understanding as to who we are. And because of that, the right, particularly the white nationalists, the Nazis in our group and others, they want that coherent belief to be simply about the colour of a person's skin, or the religious perception, where they must be Christian or whatever. So then there are those traits that people demonstrate to us that show us that their version of this culture is a racist version, and there's no other way of defining it. So PWR says here, I'll just bring it up. Fortunately, following the results of the last election, it would seem not, but I'm sure plenty in the US thought it can't happen here, and now look at what's happening there. I think there's one of my greatest fears is that what is being represented or replicated in Australia sometimes resembles what's actually happening in the United States. And that in itself is a problem, because we import shit. Seriously. We import Nike, we import American cars, we import American technology, the iPhone, stuff like that. We import shit from the United States. And we have in the past, we have imported their values, I do use that word loosely, around going into wars with them, conflicts around the world, all that sort of shit. And we have aligned ourselves greatly. Now, this is probably getting onto a tangent right now, but one of the problems is that we've aligned ourselves with crazy people because they provided a benefit to us, which was namely our own security, I guess. We've allowed them to dominate us in terms of things they wanted to sell us, particularly the media and television, films, the whole bit. We in Australia, to be honest, probably know more about American history, the states in America, than we do about our own, right? I can tell you there are 50 states in America, but if I went and asked an American how many states there are in Australia, they wouldn't be able to tell us. So our knowledge, our understandings of the United States have been sold to us on a continual basis. And we've been sucked in to believe that they are the most powerful country on this planet. When the reality is, I had a discussion with my wife about this today, actually they're not. They're not. They're far from the most powerful country on this planet. They might have a lot of arms, they might have a large population that purchase a lot of crap. That is true. But are they the most powerful country on this planet? Not anymore. Because what we have been able to demonstrate is that if the United States chooses to piss us off, not just us, but China, India, UK, Europe, Brazil, if they were to, and Africa, if they were to piss off basically the rest of the world, where can the rest of the world go, including Australia, in order to get the things that we thought were necessary that we normally got from the United States? Well, as it turned out, we can say to the rest of the world, here we are, help us. So when it came to, an example of that for me is that when it came to the Australian Defence Force to decide on what they wanted to get in terms of larger boats, not submarines, but frigates, they went to Japan and got them. The French produce boats and other stuff. Morrison's stupid decision to forget about France and go with AUKUS was crazy, but there are other people that do other things that could help us in terms of our defence. So we've decided to align ourselves more closely with China. Not because China's going to defend us, that's not the issue, but because we need them because of the now sour relationship they have with America and Donald Trump in particular, and that we can ingratiate ourselves more to China because they need us because of our mineral resources. And we need them because we trade with them around other stuff. So, and we're also looking at markets, and the rest of the world looking at markets in Europe. And one of the things I noticed really interesting lately was that Canada has decided that they're not going to sell their lumber to the United States, a border country to them. They're just not going to sell it. So they've cut it off. So they're now looking at markets around the world, which is going to be more expensive to transport their lumber and shit, but they're going to do that, and probably to Europe, which is relatively close. So they're going to sell their stuff to other countries, as opposed to the United States, who depend upon Canadian lumber to the tune of about a third, which is going to affect their building industry. So much for tariffs. So much for pissing off other countries, Donald Trump. You've done it. And the world has said, bugger you, we're now going to do what we can to look elsewhere to be able to sell our products. So the world is changing. And I'm excited about the possibilities that now sit before us with regard how this world is now adapting itself to a United States that's becoming more and more powerless and more autocratic. And the interesting thing is that as it becomes more anti-democratic, more autocratic, more like a kingdom as opposed to a democracy, the rest of the world will slowly pull further and further away from it. And I'm excited by that prospect because it means that for the first time in our history, we can stand alone, look for different alliances, be a stronger and better country. But in the midst of all of that, we have this multicultural shit that really pisses me off. And we shouldn't, but it's there nevertheless. So I wanted to have a look, apart from all of this, at Robodebt. And just to remind us, because Robodebt in Australia, for those of you that are overseas, was a case whereby Centrelink under the Liberal Party were trolling people that owed money under. So they developed this new program that would troll through all the welfare benefits that people were receiving, and then make a decision about whether or not they owed money. And some of it was wrong. And as a result of some of the outlandish figures that were presented to people on benefits and others, the amounts were extraordinary, and some people couldn't handle that, the sense of debt they now had. And as a result of that, some of them suicided. So, but it was wrong. It's been proved to be wrong. It is a stark example of overreach here in this country and the damage that it can do to people. So I'm going to take you to this particular article. So Robodebt pushed victims to the brink, and some did not live to see justice. Sherry Burden estimates that more than 500 people attended her son Tori's funeral. The 29-year-old was 6 foot tall, bald, covered in tattoos, and the most lovable boy you've ever wanted to meet. He had the biggest group of friends. Everyone adored him. He was a good big brother to other two kids, and he always looked after me. I was really blessed, talking about her son. So the story with him was that Tori's financial situation had just started picking up when he received a letter, and this is the problem, from Centrelink in early 2017 saying he owed $7,000 in debt. He had loans to pay, and the news came out of nowhere, so it was a big thing Tori carried with him. They were unable to appeal what he said was clearly a Centrelink error. Then in November 2018, on what seemed like just a normal everyday, Tori took his life. So the Robodebt meant that many people, not just Tori, but others, killed themselves because being told when you're young that you have a debt like that, when you're just getting your life in order, and is life worth living? For some people, they chose no. Tori was one of 400,000 Australians affected by Robodebt, the federal government automated scheme that used a faulty algorithm to incorrectly demand tens of thousands of welfare recipients to pay debts they did not owe. It ran from 2015 to 2016. A class action in 2020 resulted in a settlement that included $112 million in compensation for victims. It doesn't, let us remember, let us not forget, it does not cover the death of those people who suicided as a result of this. You can't bring those people back. No amount of money will ever pay for the loss of a life caused by this. And I've always thought of it as, firstly, it's taken so long to resolve this issue, and that it is sad that it happened in the first place, and it's sad that even the $112 million is not compensation, could never be compensation for the loss of a life. So there's another example here. So that was the initial $112 million, but then, I don't know whether this is good news or not, the federal government has agreed to pay $475 million in compensation as a result of the latest class action, with legal administration costs taking the total to $548.5 million. Attorney General Michelle Rowan said that when passed, it would be the largest class action settlement in Australian history. Mr. Knox hopes the results will help close the chapter for many, many victims. It will not close the chapter because those people that lost people during this will never get their kids back. It's sad, it happened, and it will never ever change anything. And there's another article in the Guardian as well. I'll just show you a bit of this, I think. The federal government has agreed to pay $475 million compensation, right? Both the government and Gordon Legal, who brought the class action, have pointed out that this is the largest class action in Australian history and is still subject to approval by the federal court, which we can hope will be just a formula, will be just normal. Why this may be largest class action in Australian history, there are 450,000 people estimated to be affected, so this will only produce an average payment of over, there we go, that's the bit I wanted, over $1,000 per person. However, Gordon Legal said class action members will have the option of individual assessment, which implies that some will receive more than $1,000 and some less. What could I say? How pathetic is that? A class action, which looks like a lot of money, produces very little to all those people that have been affected by the horror which was Robodebt. And you know, this is I guess no amount of money is ever going to resolve the issues in terms of people losing their lives through a stuff up. But I can tell you what would have made a difference, and that would have been for Scott Morrison to be incarcerated for what he did. For those people that made the decisions, illegal decisions as it turned out, to go ahead with Robodebt, those people should be incarcerated as well. So not only do we need to have some financial, remuneration, we also need to have some legal repercussions so that those people in power might eventually say, well, we won't do that again. Because if we do, we might go to jail. It might make politicians think twice. So I've got a couple of other things to talk about here. So I was going to have this conversation with you before I finish off, perhaps, about Dan Andrews. Now, Dan, Dictator Dan, as they call him in Victoria, which is interesting given what he's just done. So Dan decided that it can't be political reasons, because he's not involved in politics, for ego reasons, narcissistic reasons, because he had an invitation from Xi. But anyway, he's going to go to China and stand in front of all of these dictators and other leaders of the world, and he's going to do what he can in order to highlight his own self-importance, I guess, which he did, which is fine. Or is it? Did Dan make a fool of himself by going to China and being in a group photograph with all of these people? Maybe he did. But did it create a problem for Albanese? Well, I can tell you right now, it created a massive problem for Albo. Despite he and his government being in an overwhelmingly dominant position politically, Anthony Albanese sounded quite tetchy at times this week. He argued the toss on the ABC when pressed reasonably enough for detail on the expensive deal for Nauru to take former immigration detainees. Later in the week, a brief Senate inquiry revealed the 30-year agreement could cost for 2.5. Another story, we'll talk about that another time. Albanese dismisses as not accurate a story about officials helping to return to Australia of so-called ISIS brides and their families. So these are the issues that he faced this week. Albanese was on the back foot over issues of the government's lack of transparency, highlighted by aspects of new freedom of information legislation introduced this week. Perhaps the Prime Minister's mood was darkened this week by his good political friend, former Victorian Premier Dan Andrews, being caught up in a firestorm of criticism for attending China's enormous military parade in Beijing on Wednesday. Here's the photograph. There he is, the top right-hand corner, looking very good with Putin, Xi and Kim Jong-un. Fantastic. Go Anne. And the point was, and the point the article's making is that there are all these other issues happening, that we needed to have a sideshow of Dan Andrews. And, you know, Albo, I think in question time, answered it probably the best he could, except he could have said, no, I disagree, I don't think Dan should have gone. He did say that if there were any members here in the House, I would have disapproved of them going. So he was quite clear that he wasn't in favour of Dan going, but he didn't speak out specifically about Dan Andrews. He just said, you know, if there's anybody here, I wouldn't have allowed them to have gone to this. So he indicated that it wasn't a thing that he would have agreed upon. But what happened was that there were these other issues that were really important that could have been dealt with, but it was taken over. So there's Nauru, the ISIS brides and their families, that stuff, which is another issue. I won't bore everybody with that today. And lack of transparency, the freedom of information legislation introduced this week. So there are these three core issues, which were far more meaningful than Dan Andrews taking a trip to China to do whatever it is that Dan Andrews does in China. But nevertheless, that's what Dan did. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. And please remember to subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications. Keep yourself informed about everything that I'm doing here. And I just need to say that it's important. You know, in a troubled times, the troubled times in which we live, it's important to be able to have a voice, to be able to provide an opinion. Now, not everybody can set up or have the time to do what I do and other people do on YouTube. You know, and maybe that's the reason why people do TikTok, because it's simple and easier and whatever. And setting up a YouTube channel is probably a bit more complicated, and it's harder to get monetized. But it is important, though, that I do what I do, talk about these issues, that we have a conversation like what we're having here. And there's lots of comments, and I really do appreciate them. Do you think the Australian government would have liked to have someone here? I couldn't say so unofficially, I agree. So let me know what you think about anything that we talk about. I enjoy the conversation. I enjoy reading what you say in the comments section. Don't always have to agree with you. Some people are rude, so be it. I don't care either. Let me know what you think. Do remember, though, to subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications, all that sort of stuff. Now, I'm doing a live feed at 3 o'clock on Thursday with Avery. So if you do remember, put in your diaries, check on that. It's 3 o'clock, South Australian Central Standard Time. So we'll catch you then. In the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, just keep everybody that you know and love safe.